This is a monumentous occasion because we have reached the first blunder in from stalling to mauling. I just found a very major leak in my student Jess's game. From the first episode, this leak went undetected, but one of the hands in particular today, in fact 2 of the hands actually, really brought this big misunderstanding to my attention. This is the kind of thing that costs poker players day in, day out so much win rate. It stops them actually achieving their poker goals, and Jess has fallen victim to this kind of leak as well. I'm so glad that we found this, because now that we've diagnosed it, I've set homework, I've begun fixing it with her. We're going to sort this out and we're going to get Jess's graph going in the right direction. We are going to get this poker player to become a really strong winner. I have no doubt. Now let's get to the episode and see how we diagnosed and fixed this absolutely debilitating poker misunderstanding. Let's go. Ladies and gents, it is episode 2 of From Stalling to Mauling. I nearly forgot the name of the series there. Nearly said From Losing to Cruising. This is, of course, the 2nd season of Coaching Journeys. Last week we met Jess. If you haven't seen that, go back and check it out. Jess, how you doing?
Not too bad, thanks. Still, getting through the Carrot Poker School, applying some of the things that I've learned. It's been really good.
Yeah, it's always good to plug right at the start of the episode, is it? Exactly right. Did not put her up to that, guys. I did not. So yeah, you've got to, what was it, episode 3 you said on bluffing?
Yeah.
That's the one you looked at most recently. Any revelations on bluffing? Any sort of like things you realized you maybe didn't realize, epiphanies?
Well, maybe that I just didn't know as much as I thought. Like, I think it's going to be a really useful one, especially on kind of turn bets. I'm trying to take the word barreling out of my vocabulary. But on turn bets, where I feel like I'm bluffing with a bit of added equity and stuff like that, like just spots where I thought it would be a blatant bet, and it turned out to not be so. And it's like, okay, maybe I'm just getting this a little bit wrong sometimes.
Yeah, I think the most common thing people do wrong when it comes to barreling the turn, and I can use barreling there because I'm just denoting the node where we've bet flop and we have the chance to bet turn. I'm not using it as like, do we barrel as in like barrel is the play, it's just the node we're on. But the reason I would make that distinction is obviously what we talked about last week, right? Because barreling can just have this aggressive connotation to it for no reason. And I think a lot of the way people play when they're not that educated yet in terms of bluffing theory is that they maybe load too many of the higher equity bluffs into their betting range, forget to ever like check them, and then miss a lot of the bluffs that they're allowed to do in these so-called favorable worlds, right? When their range is doing well, they kind of forget to make the lower equity ones, because you're not actually comparing bluffing one hand to bluffing another hand. You're comparing bet and check with each hand sort of separately on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, like 100%. Like sometimes when I'm looking at the river and we're trying to figure out what our bluffs should be here, like when I'm thinking about ranges, like a lot of the time, I just don't even really think about the bottom of the range and what should be kind of where our bluffs should be coming from on the bottom end of the range. It's just kind of, yeah. So there's lots to think about for me for bluffing, I think. I think I've got the heart, but not the knowledge.
Yeah, you've definitely got the heart. There's no reservations there at all. And that's great because, like I said last time, we don't want to be like getting blood from a stone, getting you to put money in the pot. That can be really grating after a while. Maybe we have to rein you in a little bit. We have to sort of like pull on the lead sometimes just to stop you from like tearing off into the distance. But that's okay. We can learn how to do that. We can learn how to like moderate it. You've got the heart. We can build around it.
Yeah.
Today, I really want to look at, well, this is a splash pot, it looks like. Look at this 10 big blinds in the middle. This is like already like way out of my comfort zone, but I'll do my best. But I want to leak find today, Jess. Last time you dictated the pace mostly with the hands that we were looking at, and I was fine to do that. But today I think it's important that I also do a little bit of digging and probing around in your game, try to actually unearth some of the mistakes you may be less aware of. So this is the magnifying glass, the leak finder. It's a classic thing we do early on in the Coaching Journey series, and today is a good day to do it. But I want to start with a couple of hands that you feel you may have butchered. This one you described to me as a hero call that happened to work, but maybe you don't like it.
Yeah.
Let's explore this. So we have the splash pot. This is right, yeah? This isn't like PT4 glitching or something?
No, yeah, this is a splash pot.
Is this a thing? I guess it would be a thing just to stop people like limping, or is it not a thing?
Not for me. I kind of, if I'm opening a splash pot, well, quite a lot of the time, weirdly, I have kind of a limp. I limp everything in a splash pot, which I never ever do in other spots. And then sometimes you'll get people jamming behind you. You'll get like a big raise and a couple of calls, and then you can just get it all in with aces and have tons of money in the pot. This 2.2 BB for me wouldn't be a thing. I would either be limping or I would be opening to like 12 or 13.
So I do agree that like making it 4 or 5 like kind of doesn't do anything because the pot odds are like so obscene. So like whether you make it 2 or whether you make it 4, all you're really doing is making your investment worse, but you're not really achieving anything because the splash pot's already like modified the situation so much. So I think like it makes sense to either limp or make a really small investment. The advantage to this play, maybe it's not a thing currently in your game, but the reason I can see it being okay is just that it does stop other people limping behind as profitably a bit, and it might just lead to you playing smaller pots, playing in smaller fields, which is obviously great when you have a ton of dead money. You don't want to be 5-way if you can be 3-way. So I don't think there's anything wrong with this necessarily. But yeah, interesting. I'm guessing there's just absolutely no fold here with Queen 8 off. I don't know the spot, but I think any hand at all at these pot odds is going to be taking a look. So this looks good, and this would not be a hand I would be incorporating any 3-bet bluff with. I would have some hands as 3-bet bluffs here. It wouldn't be this hand. Queen 6-5, check. So I guess this range could ostensibly be a lot wider than a normal hijack range. That could just be one thing for us to be aware of here.
Yeah, and this is definitely something I was thinking about, kind of because it was a splash pot. I'm kind of not putting too much strength in that range, but
so maybe like just for familiarity, we could say, is it maybe closer to a button range than a hijack range? Is it cut off? Something like that, just so we have a reference point rather than just saying, oh, I think his range is weak. That's a bit vague. Let's sort of compare it to another range on the table to give us a sort of benchmark, I think.
Yeah, that works, definitely. So yeah, definitely kind of a button range here.
Okay, looks like a really standard call. Raise here probably isn't as bad as you would think if they're betting really merged and really frequent, but I think it's just a pure call, although there won't be a huge EV difference. Turn 2 pair. Okay, check. 9 on the river. We bet. Villain jams, and we are in the grinder. Big time in this spot. Horrific situation. How did you feel when you faced this? And then how did you start your thought process?
When I was thinking of betting leading the river, I didn't think he had much because of the check back on the turn. So I was trying to get maybe, I don't know what I was trying to do here. Like definitely trying to get some value out of maybe like one Queen X hands, like possibly even like something like jacks or tens or something like that. But then when we're raised, I think that's quite thin, maybe, given the board texture.
I mean, how thin it is has nothing to do with whether you get raised or not. This is just a repercussion, a coincidental repercussion. But yeah, I think you're right. I think we should go back and discuss briefly like whether your bet is okay on the river. I think that's important to do. So you go for this sizing. Now, I wonder if I could just coach you a little bit on how you should handle this spot theoretically, because while this isn't a particularly theoretically normal hand, there's a lot of normal, standardized theoretical stuff we can get out of this spot. What does your thought process sound like when you decide to bet here? You mentioned hands you could get value from, like a queen, etc., etc. And I think this is very common in people of your level, just to have that kind of thought process. I would recommend not doing that. That's actually verging on what I call the targeting fallacy, where we obsess over like one type of hand and imagine that villain has that and then sort of tailor our line towards that. What I'd like you to do is play against your opponent's entire range here. I'd like you to start that process by measuring with your sort of subconscious poker feelers your equity in this spot. How high do you think the equity of your hand is here? Let's then take it from there.
I don't think we have a ton of equity.
So this is before you get raised, right? Just before you get raised.
Yeah, even before we're raised, I think our equity is quite low, maybe like 50 to 55, if that.
Okay, so I would say it's higher because I don't think that diamonds check back turn really often. 7x is quite a niche combo. You beat all one pair. Villain ostensibly was playing a really wide range pre and betting flop with lots of it or all of it. And so the check back on the turn is really capping. So don't overreact too much to the texture here. You do want to react to the texture and say that brings your equity down. But let's not imagine here that your equity is actually like only half the time. Like to say that you only have the best hand half of the time here, I think would be a bit too pessimistic. However, I do agree with like your sentiment here that you don't have a massive equity hand. I don't think your equity can be like 75 or 80% here. And when you're value betting, you need to have a certain quota of equity for each sizing. And this is landing equity in the Carrot Poker School. This is what we refer to as landing equity because it's your equity prior to villain reacting to your bet. It's just the equity you start with on the river. So if your landing equity is between about 65 to 75%, sometimes like actually a bit lower, 65 to say 72, 73, usually that means that you can go for a B33 for value because it means that by the time villain is contracted, because they will contract their range when they call you, it means that you're still a favorite. Value betting doesn't work if you're no longer a favorite when called. And if you believe that your equity was only 55%, you have to wonder, what are you doing? Because after you get called, you're going to be a dog now. But if you were saying, I'm going to target Queen X, then you've fallen prey to the targeting fallacy, and that fallacy's actually got you to put money into the pot and make a polarization error, like actually bet too large for a certain hand bracket. So How does that sound so far? I know this is like maybe a new sort of way of thinking, but how does that sound?
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense, because it is very, like, I get it, like targeting Queen X for a start, we block it. So like, it's a bit of a weird one.
You block some of it.
I totally get that. And I definitely feel like I should have bet smaller straight, because betting smaller also gives us more chances to fold, I think, as well.
Let's not worry too much about that. So what you're doing there is you're actually you're kind of swinging on branches and going to like an outer branch of the tree, when really we want to stay on the main branch, right? And just sort of climb up the trunk. Don't be a chimpanzee, be a sloth. You know how tree sloths climb up the trunk of the tree and they stay on the big branch? Don't be like hanging on all the little twigs at the end of the tree, because we're not at those yet. That's really important. That might be the best analogy I've ever made in poker.
Sloths are my favorite animal.
There's a lot of coincidences, Jess. You have to stop with these coincidences now. We had a few in the last series, the last episode, and now more today. That's weird. Back to the hand. Yes, if your equity was 62, 63, it would be debatable whether you could even block for value. If your equity was 66, 68, 69, okay, you can block bet for value now. For you to big bet here, this is what I call big bet in my framework. That's like about B66, 75, 80, that sort of thing. You need to have about 75% equity. Not only that, but the spot shouldn't be one where villain is really polar. The problem is that A, this is a spot where you probably don't have that much equity, and B, if you did have that much equity, villain would be too polar for this bet to do well. People bet top pair too often on the turn exploitatively. There's not enough top pair in this range on the river. Villain doesn't land here with enough of it. Therefore, their range is actually quite polarized to stuff like 7x plus and flushes, and then stuff that's really quite abysmal. Ace king, ace jack, ace 10, king jack, pocket deuces, stuff that's really quite abysmal. When you make this bet, what happens is that not only does Queen X usually fold to this bet, in my opinion, it's also not there very often, but you commit a very large polarization error where you're betting a hand in your range for too big of a sizing for value, but clearly this isn't a bluff either, and this bet is a blunder. This is a monumentous occasion because we have reached the first blunder in from stalling to mauling. Let's see what Jess did. What is a blunder, unfortunately, is one of these polarization errors, and the way you can avoid this in future is by, firstly, considering how much equity you think you have roughly. You don't need to like calculate that, but just estimating it when you reach a node. Secondly, you can actually say, well, even if I do have the best hand a lot, is that because villain has lots of worse hands that can call, or is it because they're quite polarized and just have air a lot? If you have 75% equity, but that's only because villain usually has nothing, then that doesn't mean you can value bet any size at all. And then thirdly, avoid the targeting pitfall. Oh, I'm just going to imagine he has a queen in play as if he has a queen. If I thought he had a queen here, I'd probably bet smaller actually. Maybe this is okay, but I think it'll get folded a lot to this size anyway. So 3 things you can do better there, but the main one is just to consider your equity roughly. Consider that tier system, being able to block bet with the lower end of the equity, like 68%, whatever. Big bet 75 to 80%, and you can overbet with like 85, 90% equity usually. That's the sort of the requirements. Now, when we come to facing, well, first off, any thoughts on that before I come on to like us actually facing the raise here?
Yeah, like I totally get it. The only thing I've been having problem with is trying to judge my equity in spots. Like in this spot, for example, I said about 50 to 55, and you think it's higher. It's kind of,
sure.
I'm having trouble. Yeah, I'm having trouble
That's
trying
okay.
to picture when I've got 80% equity.
Right. Well, that's fine. But the problem is that in the hand, you didn't really try to do that, because what you did was you ended up big betting. And then when I asked you about equity, you thought it was about 55%. And if you'd asked that in game, you wouldn't have big bet, I don't think. I think the first thing to say is try to do it. And if you're asking the right question, you will get the right answer. Maybe not every time, but much more often than if you ask the wrong question.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So if the answer is a number, and you ask the wrong question, you ask a question about like what color something is, you're never going to get the right answer because you've asked about the wrong thing. So because we want to work in terms of equity here, do your best. I don't mind. If you get it wrong a few times, I don't really give a shit. That's totally okay. What I would mind more about is if you abstained from that process just because you found it hard. How to do it? Practice, building a skill. It's like getting good at a sport or something. It's not like something I can just say, oh, Jess, this is how you estimate equity. It doesn't really work that way. But yeah, it's a good question. So I think the best play here is check by far. And that's because I think any sizing of bet here, it'll be very difficult to get much value. And even if you are like a fairly decent favorite here, like 65, 70%, I think that's mostly because villain just has a lot of really bad hands. Now, the way we could exploit villain here is we could say, hang on a minute, if I check here and then you bet, well, how many value hands can you really have? You can have some flushes, you can have some straights, but you'd have bet a lot of them on the turn. You don't really have sets or anything like that much anymore, or two pair. So wouldn't it be quite easy for Pool to overbluff this node, given how wide they started, given how little filtering they've done to their range, if you were to check here? Wouldn't it be quite true to say that they could overbluff easily? What do you think?
Yes.
So therefore, the way you make money against the polarized, fairly weak range here, and it's polarized in a sense because straights and flushes are now possible, but so are loads of terrible hands, is by checking. Don't go for value here at all. If you did bet, you'd want to bet smaller, but I don't even think you should bet any size here. I think you should just check call this river and you'll do really well. So, okay. I think there may be too much aggression for aggression's sake in your game. I think I might be like telling you to stop betting so often. And I think the red line, the reason that's struggling, partly run bad, but I think it's partly that you're just betting too unselectively in spots. You're making bets that are good, but also ones that are bad are being lumped in with those sometimes.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Now we face the raise. What was your thought process here?
My thought process here is stuff that you've kind of already covered, in that I didn't think kind of flushes, any kind of sevens or any decent straight draws would be checking back the turn. I feel like if they were going to bet the flop, that's a really, really good card for them to then bet the turn again. So kind of it just didn't make sense. Like their line didn't make sense to then be like chucking it all in on the river.
So what you're saying is that you think Pool could be over bluffing due to a strong shortage, like an extreme shortage, if you will, of value hands, is what you're saying. Like the value hands just aren't there enough at the time. Right, okay. While I agree that like that's true, that most people will, I don't think a 7 here is in any way a raise anyway. I think that's totally absurd to raise a straight here. Like I think that's crazy. So I think villain's value range here is just flushes and good flushes plus. It's not even clear to me that villain can raise a 10 high flush here, because like surely they're just going to end up completely owning themselves if it ever goes in with a 10 high flush, given that your range should be quite polar here. So if they're just repping good flushes plus, they need to have enough good flush checkbacks on the turn in order to not have a very small value range. Now, I do think you should work on gradable language. So instead of saying like, I expect them to bet their flush draws on the turn, I would say something like, I think Pool over barrels the turn, meaning barrels more often than theory does with a flush draw. But there are certain flush draws that should check the turn, like 6x of spades, queen x of spades, ace x of spades, some ace x of spades that has higher showdown value, like ace 6, ace king, etc. And then there will be people who just don't barrel the turn for whatever reason with a flush draw sometimes. So instead of saying we expect them to bet the turn, let's just say we discount many of them or something like that. See what I'm doing? I'm putting your language in more of a spectrum rather than it just being like a binary black and white thing. And I will do that frequently throughout the series. I did that with Mark as well. I'll do that with everybody.
Yeah, I noticed. I was expecting this for sure.
No one escapes that because it's a really bad habit. Because if your logic reaches the conclusion that villain can't have flushes, well then of course we're calling, right? Because therefore they're always bluffing, but they're not always bluffing. You can lose here. They can have a flush. It's just good to put it that way.
Yeah, I thought here either we would be beat with a set of nines that like bink the river and just doesn't really know what to do, or like a made flush, and everything else is just kind of not.
But can villain raise? Remember, you've just bet big. Can they re-shove for a stack with a set of nines here? Do you think that's acceptable in any way or even common? Like, what would be the purpose? Why would anyone re-jam a stack with a set of nines here on a 3 flush 4 straight board after you bet big? Like, I don't really follow that part.
That is a good point. Yeah.
If you see a set of nines here, you should mark that player as an absolute maniac, like a absolutely crazy individual in a bad way, because that would be a huge polarization error. Do you remember what I mean by the term polarization error from any content you've watched?
I do remember hearing it. I can't quite remember off like top of my head.
So bets are either value bets or bluffs. If it's not a value bet and it's not a bluff, it's an error. And we call that kind of error a polarization error because you're not polarized enough for the needs of the spot. The more money is going in, the more polarized you have to be when you re-aggress. So when you, as hero here, bet big on the river, you're kind of saying I have a straight plus, something like that. I have a very good hand plus for value, or I'm bluffing. So a set of nines is a bluff catcher against your range. It doesn't rejam because it's just catching your bluffs and otherwise losing to your value range. You need to put way more emphasis on polarization. You're not giving people enough polarization and you're not respecting polarization enough yourself. This is going to end up being a thing we want to fix quickly, I would say.
Okay.
That's something I'm getting from your play in this hand, but I'm also getting it just from your thought process. To say that villain doesn't have that many flushes here isn't to say that they're over bluffing, because we also have to think about how prominent it is for people to bluff here. Now, if villain does have air, and I agree they get here with a lot of air, what do you think about Pool's propensity to bluff in this spot with air?
I don't know. Splash pots are weird. In general, I'm the type that thinks Pool's never bluffing, and they never ever have bluffs when I want them to have a bluff. In splash pots, it can be a bit weird, but in general, I would maybe say they're just not bluffing because Pool just doesn't tend to bluff.
Again, look at this language. They're not bluffing. They're all different humans, Jess. They can't all be acting in the same way. It's like if I said, I don't think people from Bristol like mint chocolate chip ice cream. Like, that's a crazy thing to say because, like, maybe many of them don't, but some of them do. So because these are all different human beings, we can't say they never bluff or they always bluff or they're not bluffing or they are bluffing. What we need to say is how many of them choose this spot to bluff in. You know, like, how common is it for a human that plays in these games to decide to bluff here? That's really what I'm asking you. And I don't want a yes or no answer. What I want is I think it's really rare, whatever kind of answer. Now, I do think you're onto something about splash pots, though. I think they instill a kind of instability right at the start of the hand that can often cause people to overbluff and lose their mind a bit later. I also think when a river like this comes, if villain holds specifically the ace of diamonds, which is quite easy to do in some capacity, they may bluff because they have the nut flush blocker. I don't actually hate a call here. I don't feel that strongly about it either way. I'm kind of unsure. I do think that if this isn't a splash pot, I would fold. I think in the splash pot, you've convinced me that there's a bit of a swing there, and I do agree with that. And I do think because, like, some people lose their mind with the ace of diamonds here and just jam it all the time, that you can probably just look this up and it can't be too bad. But I do think in general, whether they bluff or not, or how often they bluff is the better formulation, will depend on the spot. And when someone jams over a river bet on a 4 straight 3 flush board, they typically, that's not a very appetizing thing for a human to do. So I don't love this call. And the only way I'm going to give it pass marks is because this is a splash pot, and I know that that does cause a wider range to start with, which is really important because the villain has ace 3 with the ace of diamonds to start with. That's a million more ace-x combos in their range they can bluff with here. They had all the diamond aces anyway. They had all the ace-x of diamonds anyway if it wasn't a splash spot. But now, because it's a splash spot, they could have like ace 3 with the ace of diamonds, ace 4 with ace of diamonds, ace 8 with ace of diamonds. Hands they wouldn't open normally. That might make it a call. So I'm letting you away with this only because it's a splash pot. But to summarize, you've got to be more polarized when you're betting for a large sizing on this kind of texture. You need more equity to do this. You should think about the merits of checking. You should consider how polarized the opponent is. And when you face this sort of play, don't be too black and white with your hand reading. It's fine to say, yeah, they're probably not checking enough flush draws on the turn. That doesn't mean they don't have any. And you still have to compare it to how likely you think the spot is to be bluffed. And when you do that, again, it's not an all or nothing thing. It's a very gradable thing. There's so much to work on there that I want you to watch this hand back and actually come up with a list of bullet points from this and really try to ingrain it. That was a lot of teaching that just happened in that one hand.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, takeaways, or should we move on?
No, yeah, that's good.
This is the other one you brought to me that you thought, I think you said of this one that you may have butchered it. Is that right?
Yes, I did, I think.
I'm going to shut up a bit now because I've been talking a lot and I want you to sort of tell me what's going on street by street as I click through, and then I'll give you feedback at the end, okay?
Yeah, like standard 3-bet on the cutoff, I think. Then all in the 4-bet. I think this is probably kind of because of the cutoff versus button. I think this could be a jam as well, but we can also call because we're definitely ahead of the maybe some kind of 4-bet bluffs on from the cutoff. That's why I call here.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be 4-bet bluffs in theory, and I think this is great. Yep, you've basically hit the nail on the head there. I think you can slow play here. I think it might be a pure jam in most people's ranges, but I don't think the EV swing will be that big. If you don't think people will 4-bet call off Jackson's 10s enough and stuff, then you don't actually have to jam here anyway.
So I think here, I wasn't quite sure whether to put the raise in now because we've still got like aces or kings on the turn or river. Obviously gives us lots of problems. I wasn't quite sure at all what to do here. This is kind of a standard C-bet size in a 4-bet pot, so their range hasn't really narrowed all that much. I think I'm all right on the call here, I suppose. I think we can put in a raise, but like the call's not tremendously bad.
Yeah, I agree. I think call and raise it's kind of unclear to me which one is better. Against someone who's bluffing a lot pre-flop or over bluffing, you'd want to call and just allow them to, even though if they do hit an ace or a king, you lose the whole pot. There's a lot of EV to be made by getting people to bluff it off as well. So against more aggro regs that are overdoing it, probably call is really good. Against, I don't know, people that are maybe four betting more sort of linear, then raise can be good because you want to get money in before these cards come, or five comes, or something comes that just shuts down your ability to stack a hand like jacks or tens. So yeah, I could go either way here, and there's an array of different factors that would push me in either direction. I think it's super close. Ace turn, they check, we bet. Thoughts here?
After the hand, I thought we should have maybe checked this back. I think they definitely do have kind of ace king in their range. They also have kings as well, so they could also be kind of a little bit worried about that ace, but then I just don't feel like we're getting much value here from betting. I feel like we should have maybe just checked this back because we do have some showdown value still, but this isn't like, I think this whole hand goes into the, is it a value bet or is it a bluff? I feel like I'm bluffing where I'm just not going to get many folds in this hand.
You're going to get folds, but they're going to be from king queen, or they're going to be from like a hand that you crush. So bluffing is all about getting better hands to fold or getting hands with a ton of equity to fold. So I agree, you certainly cannot bluff with this much showdown value, because remember, when you choose to bluff, you're competing against the line that you haven't taken. You're competing against the line of check, and check is worth an absolute shit ton of the pot. A ton of the pot. If villain has kings, I would bet and go all in the river or whatever. Like if I knew they had kings, maybe I would decide to do that. But that's really the only hand I can see in their range that's liable to ever really fold that's better than yours. I think like someone folding an ace by the end of the hand at this SPR that they've just hit on the turn is like very, very optimistic. I don't think that's going to happen very frequently. But again, note my language. What am I doing with my language? Very frequently.
Yeah.
It's gradable language, right?
Not making absolute statements of fact.
Yeah, I'm not like, they never bluff, innit? They never bluff. I'm not sitting there doing that, because that's a good way to become eternally stalling and never get to mauling. So we're not going to do that. So I know you're going to fix that one for me, for maybe not instantly or overnight, because it is a habit, but I know you're going to fix that for me. So the idea is that in game you chose to bet here, and in game you must have had some kind of motivation or reason for betting. And there's two options. Either that was you thought you were value betting, or you thought you were bluffing, or alternatively an erroneous third, renegade reason entered your thought process and just made you do something that's a mistake. Which do you think it was in game? Do you remember the root cause of this bet?
I can't remember the root cause of the turn bet. I know exactly why I bet the river, but the turn bet, I think I was just a bit lost. I think that's where kind of in this hand, I was like, oh, damn it, ace on turn. That was maybe a bad flop call. Like, that's kind of going over things and ruminating about things you can't really change at that point. So I think that was that.
You've kind of lost your mind a bit in the middle of this hand, and you've gone off of the beaten track, and you've gone away from poker theory and what poker theory tells you to do here. The way to protect yourself from all of that here is just to say absolute raw fundamental truth. If there were commandments of poker, this would be number one. Bets are either primarily value bets or primarily bluffs. If you know that, you can't bet here. I can never bet here because I know that there's no reason to, and that's primary. And it's automatic. You would have to pay me a lot of money or put a gun to my head to get me to bet here, because that's just too ingrained. And it doesn't matter if I'm being electrocuted or I'm currently having a bucket of water poured over my head or punched in the face, I'll probably still check, because it's just that ingrained. It's just that automatic. It's second nature. So what we need to do with you, Jess, is we need to get this part of your game completely primary, that bets are value, bets are bluffs, and then you ever been so tilted or so lost or so confused that you opened 8-4 off under the gun, or 3-bet 9-6 suited in the hijack? You ever done that because you were so lost?
Possibly.
Not when you're like drunk at the home game or like really mad, but like you wouldn't normally, right?
No, it'd have to be at least a Broadway. I'd have to have a king.
At least the king 4 off is acceptable.
Yeah,
king 4 off's fine. We like that guy, the king 4 off. But no, we want to. You get what I'm saying though, right? Like if you are absolutely secure in the knowledge of something in a subconscious level, no distraction or feeling of uncertainty or doubt or regret will throw you off enough to make you violate that principle. And that's where we're going with this one. We're going to make that primary and automatic, innate, you could say. We're going to make it innate. So this is a polarization error. I don't see any I can't even tell whether this is closer to a value bet or closer to a bluff. That's why I know it's like a really big polarization error, because if I was like, well, it's kind of a value bet, then it's not too big a polarization error. See, when it's in that absolute no man's land, that wasteland in between, that's where you know that it's a polarization error, right? A big polarization error. So let's be aware of those kind of like barren wasteland bets that are literally in the abyss. That makes sense?
Yes.
I just want to say one thing. You're not losing at that much of a clip, and after rake back, you're actually profitable, correct?
Yes.
And you are making some pretty abhorrent errors. If we fix, and I don't mean that in a mean way, I mean that in a sky's the limit way. Look how much money you can make when you fix this stuff sort of way.
Yeah.
There's a lot of potential here because you are doing some things well, especially you're regressing in other spots. So if we fix this, we can really crush this game. I'm convinced. Okay, you remembered why you did this then, so...
This, and I think this kind of links into the turn. I think maybe the small bet on the turn when checked on the turn was like me thinking I can't rep an ace at all if I check this ace back, or it'd be harder for me to rep an ace
dustbin,
if I check it back.
Bringing the dustbin out right now. Rep is in the bin permanently. It does not come back out the bin again. That is a trash thought process and it belongs in the trash. Okay. And the reason is that it has nothing to do with the primacy of whether you can value bet or bluff the turn. Whether you can bluff the turn depends on your fold equity from better hands and how good bluff is compared with check. On the other hand, it depends on that comparison. When you say rep, you say something that has only to do with a possible mental state of your opponent insofar as their beliefs towards your range go, and that is not enough to even influence your fold equity or for you to know what your fold equity is, let alone is it enough to say that betting is better than checking. So what you're doing with rep there is you're actually taking a thought process that has nothing to do with the EV of your choice and using it to govern your thought process, to govern your decision. I don't like to interrupt. I do like to interrupt people. That's a lie. I try not to interrupt people. But when they say something like that, I want to grab it now instead of letting it sound like it's a normal thing that you're allowed to say, because that will harm your game. It really will.
Yeah.
No more repping. Repping is gone. I think you watch too much bad poker content. I think you've taken in too much bad poker content casually. Did you watch a lot of like entertainment poker stuff, like when you were getting back into the game by any chance, or back in the day or something?
Well, yeah, the reason I got back into the game was because the World Series of Poker stuff was appearing on my YouTube and kind of caught my attention.
The algorithm got you.
Yeah, the algorithm's definitely got me.
The algorithm is responsible for targeting. It's responsible for ruining the career and life of many aspiring poker players. Anyway, on the river, let's get back to where we were before I rudely interrupted you. What were you thinking in game on the river? Let's just finish that thought process. You said you were thinking about repping the ace by betting the turn. Was it a continuation of that thought process on the river then?
Yeah, it was. At this point, I'm thinking I don't have much showdown value given that he called the turn.
You might have some, but yeah.
Yeah, he's either got an ace or this is maybe the reason for the stab is that he's either got an ace or he's got kings because it's 4-bet pot. And could he maybe fold kings here? It's the only way I'm going to win the pot. That was kind of the reason.
Right. Excellent. So actually what we have here is a twofold thing. You have a mental game leak and a technical leak basically working together to cause a mistake here. The mental game leak is that you feel like you can't let the pot go, that you just really want to win it, and that's quite a strong desire. And then the technical leak here is this over specific hand reading that like maybe he can have kings and he can fold. And I do agree that like kings is quite a likely hand for him to have now, but it's still only 6 combos and he can still have a6 plus here very easily. And even if you do make kings fold here, do you make enough of the, you might not always make it fold. Some people will never fold kings here, right? So when you look at pool, they're not all folding kings, and ace-x is practically never folding, and there are some ace-x combos here. There's even like ace-5 that hit the straight and stuff. So I think checking is better, because here's the thing, I don't think your check EV is 0. Stop talking about showdown value in the sense of, I don't have much. Bluffing is meant to usually be break-even in game theory in most of these spots in the river, where you've been tripling or doubling. Usually bluffing is break even. So if you can just win 5% of the time by checking, I know that doesn't like make you happy, and it's not going to be like, yeah, I get to win the pot all the time, or I get to hero bluff him off of kings. I know it's not like that, but here's the thing. 5% of the pot is better than break even. Bluffing is break even because there's a risk associated with it. There's the extra loss of the chips. So if this bet doesn't work, you know, this is more than third pot, so it's going to have to work about 30%, maybe not quite 30%, but some 28, 29, 30% of the time for it to be good. I mean, clearly it works less than half the time. I think it works less than that as well, but that's not even the problem, because that's for it to be profitable. It still needs to be better than checking. And the thing is that villain could have king 6 suited here. Sometimes, occasionally. Villain could have jacks here occasionally, and you're ignoring that when you say you don't have showdown value. You have a bet, and you need bluffing to be better than checking, and checking is worth something. I know this is alien, this process of like going back and forth between the lines and comparing them, but this is what we need to get you doing. So sometimes showing you the end game thought process, while it's unfair to expect you to do that right now, it gives you a really good like thing to aspire to, a good benchmark for the future. Same thing, summarize this for homework, bullet points, a list.
Yeah, definitely.
Loads of stuff in this one too. Any thoughts on this?
No, I mean, yeah, it's all good points. Just lots to bullet point and take through when the YouTube video drops.
But you're getting the idea, right? Some things are just really primary and other things are really irrelevant, and you're doing too much irrelevant thinking right now.
Yeah, I feel like where I'm kind of learning on the Carrot Poker School as well, like lecture 2 and lecture 3, all about value and kind of when we can and can't bluff, value in denial and all of that sort of stuff. I think that's like quite a good point for me to be at the minute now, because I can just work on it and really try and concentrate on it.
Absolutely. And guys, the Carrot Poker School is still on sale on carrotcorner.com. It's a 30+ hour video course. Jess is just working through grade 1 for the first time because, like Jess, many players have absolutely never studied theory properly. Poker has been an undertaught and mistaught subject. There's not been enough academic rigor. And I think, Jess, that's why you're in this situation. The WSOP content that's aimed at like entertainment, not even learn-tertainment, not even halfway between learning and entertainment, but full entertainment, has basically gone all the way through to your subconscious, and I hate to say this word because it's kind of extreme, but poisoned your understanding of the game and what your thoughts should be doing. And we need to now basically detox you and put you into like a rehab where you're not allowed to say certain things. It's almost like the thought police. It's like, no, we can't actually say that word. Not because it's illegal or we're going to like throw you in some Orwellian jail, but more because it's actually going to like really hold back your progress, and that's why you're here. But guys, if you do want to embark on that same academic theoretical journey, then Carrot Poker School is on carrotcorner.com. Link in the description. Let's continue. I will do another hand or two, and then we're going to wrap up. We've got so much out of those 2 hands there that I don't even feel the need to do that much more today. I feel like that's plenty to work on. But I do just want to do a few quick line checks with you. Okay, 3-way pot, big blind, pot on the flop, queen jack. Looks like a fairly easy call. I don't think raise is like horrible in theory, but I don't love it against recreationals because the thing is just they're going to 3-bet you a lot sometimes, these recreational players, and they're going to deny your equity, and it's going to be a bit of a shame. So I do like call here. I think this is better than raise.
Okay.
So queen of diamonds, check bet, very easy call. I'm flying through this a little bit because I'm now in leak finding mode. If you raise here, it's because you are not thinking about polarization properly. Good. You didn't raise there. I don't think you ever would raise there, but I wanted to cover my bases in case you did. Check, check. Yeah, so I think this is actually totally fine. I have no issues with that whatsoever. You're just playing your hand against aggression as it should be played. Yeah, splash pots are weird. You're probably more of a specialist than I am in this type of spot.
Yeah, like that's just a small open on the button. Like it's not making me go away.
Yeah, I like this. And again, I think this is turn bet's going to be really overbluffed. So much queen X will bet flop, but not just that. It's also just a super wide range pre because of the splash pot. One of the most important things you can do in these games with splash pots is be an absolute station. What have I just done telling you to be a station? What was I thinking? God. What I do want to stress is, though, that people can overbluff a lot when their range hasn't filtered and when their range has started off too wide. So flop, their range doesn't filter towards straights or anything strong. Filters away from that when they check. Then on turn, they go for this. And it's like, really? So you started with loads of combos because it's a splash pot and you're on the button. So we said the hijack was the button. So what's the button? Like the heads up button or something? The button is like really wide. So then they're saying I have a queen. That's possible, but it's hard to have a queen when you started with a million combos and you checked flop. So this is a very mandatory bluff catch, and you should call all river bets here as well.
Okay.
Hugely overbluffed scenario because the base range was way too loose. So it's no shock that, I mean, I've not even seen the showdown here, but I'm guessing we win against low cards. Yeah, absolutely. Just like expect to win 80-90% after I call that turn. Do be aware of people's base ranges, the ranges they start off with, and look to do your stationing, because I know you're a fan of stationing, but look to do it in spots where their base range started very wide, where it's also easy and appetizing to bluff, and where they haven't done a lot of filtering by calling or condensing. Those are the three things you're really looking for. So in the first hand, where I wasn't a massive fan of your river call, the problem was that while villain did have a massive base range and that was in our favor, it was not a natural or appetizing spot to bluff in, shoving over a large bet on that river. It was quite the opposite, actually. But I'm not saying it was bad, it was just that you had those two competing factors pushing and pulling in different directions. In this hand, you actually have a completely wide base range, a very appealing spot to bluff in because it's like just check two on the turn twice, you expect fold equity to be high, and no filtering whatsoever towards calling or condensing. So you basically have the ultimate bluff catch spot here, and that's why if the river is a 3 and villain bets pot, you snap it with one pair like an absolute hero and you say, fuck you, you don't get to make me fold in a spot where your base range is stupidly wide and you've not done any condensing. You don't have to say the fuck you part, but that's optional.
No, I swear loads. I probably would say fuck you, defo.
We shall wrap up there.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure teaching you today, and I think we've unearthed quite a lot of interesting stuff. Ninja the cat has also appeared to
I noticed.
give us his approval. How do you feel? Was the coaching okay for you? It wasn't like too harsh, hopefully, or too like critical?
No, yeah, it was good. No, definitely it was good. I think I've kind of got a lot to work on from that, and I'll be really, really interested to watch the video again, take some notes, and make sure I'm focusing on the stuff brought up. Because, like I said, I think it fits in with what I'm going through in the Carrot Post skill at the minute, anyway. So, like, yeah, it's just a good spot for me to really, really narrow in on those kind of things.
Yeah, I think there's just so much like low hanging fruit for us to fix that by the time we fixed it, I think you'll be winning pre-rakeback and post-rakeback. You're just going to be doing really well and you'll be moving up, and you've got a good setup here with the rakeback deal and stuff. So I do think that you can get up to some higher stakes and then take the next decision in your career at that point quite easily. But let's fix the low-hanging fruit and get these bad habits out of there. A lot of it's uninstalling and then a lot of installing at the same time of the right things which you're getting from the school and from these sessions. But yeah. All right, we'll be back in a week's time for the next episode, guys. Hope you're enjoying From Stalling to Mauling. And don't forget, carrotcorner.com is where you can get everything poker education wise from our store done by me. Do smash the like button, do leave a comment, let us know what you think about the series. It's really important for us to see how it's going down. If you have any improvement tips or anything what we could do better, do let us know, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now, guys.